Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for episode 4 of Resetting the Table. Resetting the Table is a conversation series that unites artists, activists, and experts to engage in a rich dialogue about gender and public policy. And this programming series, which is free to the public, is part of the world premiere of No Pants in Tucson. And we are thrilled also to be sponsored by Supermajority. First, let me do a brief introduction and say hello. My name is Marissa Moschitto. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the founding artistic director of the Anthropologists. And I'm so thrilled that I am going to be joined here tonight by so many fabulous artists. I also would like to welcome our two fantastic ASL interpreters, Claire and Stephanie. Thank you so much for being here. ASL interpretation is provided by Inclusive Communication Services, in part thanks to a grant from Art New York, the Alliance of Residence Theaters New York. We love them, and you should too. I'm so thrilled that this series is sponsored by Supermajority Education Fund. They focus on research about the role and standing of women. They educate the public about issues of importance to women and support policies that advance women and people of all marginalized genders. We want you to check them out, especially their majority rules, which really overlap so brilliantly with all of the themes that we have been exploring in No Pants in Tucson. Our motto at the Anthropologists is where art meets action, and it conveys our commitment to providing avenues for activism and civic engagement, which we've done with over 25 organizations and partners since our founding in 2008. This programming that you are enjoying tonight builds community and provokes conversation through live events. And we do want to be conversing with you, so please do make use of the comments feature, whether you are tuning in on YouTube or Facebook. We want to hear from you. So now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our first guest of the evening, Linnea Valdivia, our dramaturg. A round of applause. I forgot the applause sound effects. Hello, and welcome, Linnea. I am so thrilled to have you here and to be able to share your brilliant brain with the world and anyone who tunes into our YouTube channel. I am going to give a little bio of you, and then you can fill in other things should you wish. But Linnea is a professional freelance producer, dramaturg, and playwright. They hold a BA in English from Whitman College with minors in gender studies and theater, and has collaborated on projects with theaters around the country, including the Lark, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Curious Theater, Playwrights Realm, and the Anthropologists. Hooray! And you are currently, tell us where you currently are. Oh, you are currently muted.
My apologies. I get a second draft at it.
Yes, you do.
I am in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm in the interdisciplinary PhD in theater and drama program at Northwestern.
Amazing. And thanks to the power of StreamYard, as we're on tonight, and Zoom, we have been collaborating since this summer, but we were very fortunate that you joined us in person this past July for the last leg of No Pants in Tucson. So really, maybe let's take a step back. I know we have a lot of friends who have signed in for this conversation, which I'm so thrilled about. But we want to make sure that everyone knows, what are we talking about when we keep saying no pants? Aside from the cultural phenomenon that happened this past 18 months with everything going virtual, No Pants in Tucson is the name of our newest show, which was inspired by an 1883 ordinance from Tucson, Arizona, prohibiting cross-dressing. The project itself was started 3 years ago We'll get more into that in our whole developmental process, but it was started 3 years ago, inspired by a whole host of archaic, outdated, gender oppressive state laws, some of which were mildly amusing, others which are quite infuriating and disturbing. And unfortunately, we're seeing a whole host of gender oppressive laws continue to be passed in this country. I do hope that if you're new to Resetting the Table, you will visit our YouTube channel, where you will see episodes 1 through 3, including our stream from November 1st, where we spoke with 3 reproductive rights lawyers and the executive director of the Arizona Abortion Fund about what is happening with the fight for reproductive rights in this country and the intersection with transgender rights. So, Linnea, we had been working on this play for nearly 2 years when we found each other, when I found you, and we connected on the phone, and it became very apparent. I mean, I felt like I found the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow when I met you through your website, and then we talked, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Linnea is such a great fit. And then you were in New York for the exact time period that we needed you to be. So thank you for managing that.
Absolutely. I had no control over it, but thank the universe, I guess.
Well, I do every day. I want, we toss around the word dramaturg and dramaturgy with wild abandon. And I want everyone who's tuning in to know what is a dramaturg, Linnea?
I am so glad you asked. Thank you so much. So a dramaturg, because I think a lot of people don't quite know what that term is. I think many dramaturgs don't know what that term is, but the most simple way I can explain it is that a dramaturg is a designer of information for a creative production. So like you have a lighting designer, a sound designer, a dramaturg can be many things, but they are often kind of tasked with crafting information for a show, whether it's developmental, like for No Pants, or for a fully realized show, like designing for production, which was also sort of part of my job here as well. So
I love that. I love that phrase, a designer of information. And that's so essential to our process and our creative product. So the Anthropologists, we've been around, we're teenagers now. We're 13. And so we create all of our plays from source material and research, and that can include found text, historical and cultural artifacts, photographs. We're going to get into some of the things that we used for this show. And that is always just such an essential part of the journey, right? Is figuring out, like, how do we first curate the information, and then how do we assemble it into, how do we engage with it in the rehearsal room? How do we assemble it into a script? And then how do we make that work clear to an audience who is coming to see the play? And we are a company that devises our work. So that means that for us, it means that we are building the show as an ensemble. And the ensemble includes more than just performers. Anyone can be a part of our devising process. We try, and especially in those early stages, make things very horizontal so that anyone of any theatrical background can come in, play with the source material, get up and generate content, including you, Linnea. At your first rehearsal, we got you on stage. You were tap dancing. It was amazing.
I was tap
And
dancing.
you can, I really wanted to include a video of that.
Oh my gosh.
I did not, but I will say, if you are a Patreon subscriber, you have access to a little video that features a montage from rehearsals, and it does have a little clip of Linnea at her first rehearsal with us, and where you just with utter confidence and wild abandon got up on a stage and made something happen. It was beautiful, and we thank you for that. Um, so a dramaturg, we've had the good fortune of working with a dramaturg since our inception. We try and make sure that all of our dramaturgs have names that begin with L. So we began with Louise Goff for the first several years before she went back to her homeland of Australia. And then for many years, we collaborated with Lindy Rosario. And now we have Linnea, and I'm so thrilled. And actually, this project was very unique in that we have the fingerprints of two dramaturgs and a dramaturgical assistant on this project, because Lindy did work with us in 2020 during the first phase of script development, where we were really starting to assemble like what are these stories and how are they all going to fit together. And we also welcomed a dramaturgical assistant, my Joyce Caesar, and then for our final leg of development, should I say sleeve or arm? No, leg is appropriate for pants. Yeah. You came on board, and it was really great to have someone who was completely fresh to the devising process, but not necessarily fresh to all of the research material that we were using. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about like where some of your past work intersected with the themes that we were looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree that I really feel like the universe pulled like really, it was such a wonderful match that we found each other for this project, because a lot of my past work is focused on new work development for plays, and specifically I seem to keep getting drawn back to plays that interrogate history or try to sort of excavate histories that have been largely overwritten in a lot of my works. And one of my favorite projects that I've been a part of was a reimagining of Oklahoma, like kind of a queer Oklahoma. And part of the dramaturgical process for that was excavating a lot of queer history in early and late 19th century, early 20th century America that's been kind of largely overlooked, or to put it kindly, or even destroyed or discarded. And I think that is a big part of what this process was, and what it was asking us to do as artists, is to look and like search and find these histories that have been, either swept under the rug or like intentionally discarded.
Absolutely. I distinctly remember being on the phone with you the first time in this like interview, which sort of like the subtext was me being like, I really hope that she likes us and likes the work and wants to do this. But I remember talking to you, and you used the phrase like that your dramaturgy is about reparative history, which like set off sparks for me of like, oh yeah, that's what we've been engaged in for so many years. So that was really, really gratifying. And for us, as we are creating a show, we often we start with a provocation, or we start with this little like seedling. In this case, it was this series of we were calling them the bad laws, but what we're doing as a company and as artists is we are asking, like, can we use source material to challenge our assumptions, to challenge what we think we know? Can we use research to broaden or break dominant narratives? and can we use, so often our plays are asking, can we use these archival materials, this history, to better understand what's happening now? And when you joined us, we were entering year 3 of development.
Mhm.
We also we had done 2 in-person workshops in 2019 where we were bringing in laws and legal text and historical information and some historical figures that we've been finding into the rehearsal room, getting up on our feet, creating movement, choreography, scenes, and we were about to go into another workshop when the pandemic hit. And so suddenly we were an ensemble working as individual artists over Zoom to try and create a play together. But one unexpected thing was that we had suddenly had so much more access to historical archives that we didn't have prior, because JSTOR did a partnership with the library, and I like totally got to nerd out and just download so many academic articles. But it really opened up so many other avenues for finding stories. And at that point, we really were asking ourselves and had identified, like, okay, many of the histories and the writing that we were encountering, especially in terms of dress reform from the 1850s, because remember, this law that we're sort of using to springboard from in this play is from 1883, but a whole series of anti-cross-dressing laws proliferated in the 1850s. But so much of the people and stories about dress reform is about white, cis, middle-class women. And so we really, with some urgency in April of 2020, went back looking for other histories, whose histories weren't we finding and why. So that's really what we're going to start talking about, you and I. And then, you know, it was beautiful. You came in July 2020, right? No, July 2021. 21. Oh my gosh, years. I
Time.
don't know. So we had started working on the script in July, August 2020, and we're creeping along with our development process. And at the beginning of 2021, we started making moves towards this full production that was going to be live and in person. And in the meantime, we were commissioning artists to create short digital pieces inspired by the research archives. And those are up on our website. We'll get a link in there later in the comments, because you can watch or listen and experience them now. And so when you came, you further complicated the research for us and how we were using it, which was such an exciting part of the process, I think. So before we bring in some rehearsal artifacts from the devising process, I want to talk with you a little bit about this idea of archival gaps, because the idea for this conversation that we're having right now happened, I think, in October, one of our last dramaturgy meetings. We were Zooming. You had gone back to, or you had moved to Chicago. We were in rehearsal for the full production. And even then, towards like getting really close to opening night, we were still talking about this idea of archival gaps and how could we make that apparent in a theatrical way to the audience as they watched and experienced the show.
Yeah. Hopefully I'm complicating it in a good way. That's
Yeah, totally.
That's all I can hope for as a dramaturg. But yeah, this idea of archival gaps, that's the tricky thing when you're working with these sorts of histories, is that because of this kind of, for whatever reason, dearth of information, like around around the figures that we were working with, or any sort of reparative history, there are always going to be gaps. There's going to be a missing name, a missing date. There's always going to be something um, that that we as artists are going to have to try and navigate. That we as historians, because I think that's ultimately what our project is. It's a historical project. We as historians are going to have to make choices when we're presented with this lack of information. And I think one of the things that is so wonderful about that is that we have an opportunity, like in rewriting these histories, to or not rewriting them, because I don't think that's exactly what we're doing here. I think we are sort of
We're rescuing a lot of them.
I think
And
so, yeah.
I think, yeah, this is a good moment also to point out. So the Anthropologists, we've been around for 13 years. We always have made plays based on research, source material, but we don't create oh gosh, the phrase just totally flew out of my head now. It's not verbatim theater. It's not documentary theater. But we do treat the source material and the research with a great deal of integrity. And so actually this first historical figure that we wanted to focus on is a great example of, like, what do you do when you don't find a lot of information? So I'm going to pop this presentation up. So we have our first two characters, Alice and Mary. This book, Masquerading in Male Attire by Carrie Seagrave, was so essential to the researching of this play. The author did this incredible job of, talk about excavating, but like excavating all of these newspaper articles that highlighted women and non-gender conforming people who had been arrested for wearing men's clothing. The simple act of wearing a pair of pants. I paused this just so that we can look at this. Really is the only piece of information that we have about these two women. Mrs. Alice Wilson and Mrs. Mary Carter were arrested on the night of October 1st, 1890 on Forbes Street in Pittsburgh for masquerading in male attire. And so this little tiny article just gives us the barest of facts, that they were reportedly looking for their husbands, who they expected to find in a speakeasy. And they were both Black and both found guilty of masquerading and sent to the workhouse for a term of 30 days. So many of the stories, by the way, of women being arrested and for wearing pants resulted in either jail time in a workhouse, or a fine. Workhouse if they couldn't afford the fine. And so we really were struck by this story and how much was missing. Also, I do want to admit, I don't remember if you were there the day that we did this, Linnea, where when we got in the room and with the actors, and they were like, they're not looking for their husbands. That I was taking it so literally. I'm like, and they were looking for their husbands, and so they had to go find them out in the speakeasy. And everyone else in the room was like, no. They wanted to go to the speakeasy. So this is a story that we had very scant details, and yet there was something so compelling about these women, and we wanted to make sure that, like, we didn't want to abandon their story simply because the source material was so bare. And so here's an example of where, when you watch the show, you'll see this scene unfolding between them. And we brought in other source material about, from that time period, what were the racial and class lines that were drawn around clothing. You can feel free to jump in. I get like all nerded out about this, and I just start yapping away. So interrupt me.
Oh no,
Or
no.
design my information.
I'll just embellish around the sides, but like
see, sorry.
I was just going to jump in and say, like, yes, this is another this is another opportunity when we're presented with some information, but like we are presented with mostly gaps, which I think it's really exciting, like as an artistic team, and especially as a devising artistic team, to be able to experiment and think about these gaps, especially from a source like the one on the other slide about that was a police report or like a newspaper clipping, which was not like Alice and Mary did not write that either, So it's like we have to, with so many of these sources, we have to navigate not only the gaps that are like just present in the writing, but also we have to navigate kind of what and who and why that story is being mediated in the way that it is.
Yeah, and this is perfect timing for a question that is in the comment section, which I'm going to pull up ahead of the Q&A just because it fits so perfectly. I popped it in here. I'll be interested in knowing the interface of Linnea's information with the artists working remotely. Did y'all have digital versions of the inspiration boards that we typically use in a room? So this is an example of like images that we pulled from we used a lot of just so many Google Drive folders, too many. That's going to be a massive like post-show project also of really streamlining everything. But yes, we absolutely had shared folders with photographs, and we had a Pinterest board, and
very robust.
It was a lot of Pinteresting, but so it was quite challenging to find archival images of Black women in male dress, and like this one all the way on the left with the person in the very long jacket is from the 1850s or 1860s, from my Bible, the Women in Pants book. And even this photograph, the label of it, Bessie, Esther, and ? And so here you see just a production still of Marissa and April, who you're going to meet later tonight, embodying Mary and Alice in our imagined interaction between the two of them. Shall we hop on to our next character?
Yes.
So if this is an example of historical figures about whom we were filling in a lot of blanks, our next character, interestingly, it kind of has a foot in each side. Our James Allen, born as Maud Allen, where there was a little bit more information about this person in just a couple of newspaper articles, including some first person like direct quotes, if we are to believe that the quotes really were said by James, and recorded accurately by the journalists. And this is one scene where we really were trying to preserve as much of the found text as possible until we got to the very end, which we'll be showing the end of the speech. But I would love to get your thoughts and impressions on the process of creating this scene with James Maud Allen.
Yeah, I mean, this was a really interesting case, case study for James Maud's story because of what you were just saying. Because we have much more information than Alice and Mary. We have like a pretty comprehensive article about the occasion of his arrest, and kind of a little bit like a more robust picture of his life. But again, like what we were just talking about before, it is towing this line between the non-fictional and the fictional, or what, and then how do we determine like where that line is? Because this is not James or James Maud writing their own story. This is somebody else coming in and likely for the purposes of selling papers is likely sensationalizing or emphasizing certain attributes of their life that, you know, maybe maybe, you know, James or Maud wouldn't have, you know, elected to share with the world themselves. And in the actual text that that this character is speaking, we tried to preserve, as you're saying, a good bit of what was actually in the text that we found for them, but then you know, while also trying to kind of trouble where we found in the archive, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And a few things just in terms of this story, the story itself. James's assigned gender at birth was discovered when they needed to go to the hospital for medical services. They were ill. They went to the hospital. They were discovered by a doctor, and then the police were called, and James was arrested. And that is how we know about this person and their story. And to your point, this is the information that we have from the articles that we found, and there were just two, was not necessarily something that that James wanted shared. And certainly from the quotes that from James, you get this sense of a very intensely private person. And this was one of many stories where an assigned at birth gender was revealed in a medical setting, and a big theme in the play. So we're going to play a little clip of April Barber in performance. Oh, I also wanted to mention that there is a digital piece inspired by this same historical figure, created by the actor and filmmaker Michelle Washington, and that is on our in our No Pants digital realm. So definitely check that out. And there's also a great conversation between April and Michelle that will be up on our YouTube channel. But I'm going to play this, and we're going to pop the text into the comments because there is not closed captioning on this particular video clip.
I was born Maud Allen. I spent 8 years as James Allen. Only my grandmother knew. What compelled me to go to the hospital that day? The newspaper didn't say. Did the doctor treat me before placing me under arrest? The newspaper didn't say. Did they permit me to continue teaching Sunday school at the Ebenezer Baptist Church? Did they force me to become Maud once again? The newspaper will never say. What the newspaper did say: I am a young mulatto. I possess a rather heavy beard. I'm wearing a natty suit of blue serge. It is 1909.
Now we have one other historical figure that we wanted to sort of pull back the curtain on, if you will. That first slide was fast. It is Harry Allen. And this is a figure that we actually had quite a deal more information about, although I did want to note that this second picture here is actually of another person, but in this same realm of fascination about this sort of Western outlaw, not only an outlaw from like the legal point of view, but also someone that was born a woman and eschewing their gender role. I think I also want to highlight here with you, Linnea, one of the ways in which you and we as an artistic team complicated the resources and the source material was in how we approached thinking about the nuances of gender in all of these stories that we're finding, because we're looking at stories from the late 1800s to early 1900s, which is long before the terms non-binary or transgender came into the public lexicon. And yet we know that just because those words didn't exist doesn't mean that people with those gender identities didn't exist. But it did make us be really thoughtful and careful about how we spoke about and for these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's really tricky, is like this terminology. And I think that's why I was kind of using, that was why I was using James and Maud's names interchangeably a few minutes ago for those in the audience. And that's something that we did kind of behind the scenes as well, is because we do not know for most of these figures how they might identify today. We do know that they did not have access to these sorts of terminology. They didn't like this idea that one could be trans or non-binary. That was not like terminology that they had. And so that's something that we as an artistic team and within this play too, that we resisted doing as well, because it's not, you know, I don't have any place as an artist or as a historian to say, oh, definitively James is a trans man. I don't know. I know that this is a person whose story was heavily mediated and whose fragments that I can piece together in a way that I might be able to make the case for XYZ. But like, you know, I do not, with 100 years between us, have any authority to, you know, put that terminology on these historical figures. And this is particularly interesting with a figure like Harry Allen, who even through these mediated sources continues to say to these reporters, I am a man, very explicitly, which not many of these figures did.
Yeah, and in creating the storytelling around Harry Allen, we did do a lot of work on really challenging the source material and the articles about written about Harry Allen, and really trying to problematize, as you would say, like problematize what we were hearing and what was being written about this person. One other thing that was different for us this time around was just exploring different ways of how we were going to employ the source material in the rehearsal room, because sometimes we're using it as a jumping off point, and other times we are trying to keep especially that first person speech intact. So I wanted to highlight these two quotes that are purportedly by Harry from different newspaper articles, that we had two different artists create songs using this text. And I have to say, it was so like moving, hearing how poignant Harry's words were set to music. And that was always a point in the show that just like I caught my breath a little. But I think also just to be able to highlight his story in that way was really powerful for us as storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
Before All right, so our next piece has to do with not any historical figures. It has to do with other text that we were interacting with in the rehearsal room. So was there anything about Harry that I was leaving out?
No, I don't
No.
think so. No.
Okay. All right. So here we go. Oh, wait. I had a spoiler. It's a spoiler. I forgot to rewind the video. Oh my gosh. Pretend you didn't see that. All right. So I had to put this in here. This is our like cheeky annotated piece of historical text. This is ordinance number 44, the ordinance that started it all in Tucson in 1883. But this was essentially a template. This was not the first anti-masquerading law or anti-cross-dressing law, but they all had much of the text in common. And essentially, this is what I wanted to say before was, on its face, the legal text seems kind of innocuous and even boring, right? And we talked about that a lot in the rehearsal room, like how do we reconcile the legal text with the very real and often violent application of the law on people's bodies? And so while we had the text from Tucson, we started to look at other legal text, and you gave so much to us to play within the rehearsal room to start to create or craft a lineage of laws that get like replicated or repurposed. Like we see a lot of the language being used over and over again until we get to 2020, 2021, with these echoes from these older laws in the legislation that's trying to be passed today. And the archival gap here, of course, is when we're looking at this legal text, is who are the people who are being negatively impacted by the law? I mean, that was our whole investigative thrust here. Who does the law impact? So let's see, we're gonna skip along here. You brought in some additional text for us to play with in the rehearsal room. So here, this was a fun day. So you had pulled all together, we had pulled different text. We pulled legal text from the Mann Act, which was the legislation, the law that Harry Allen was charged with. But we also had anti-trans, like bathroom ban language, and we had the pieces of text from SB 8, the Texas abortion bill, and the Comstock laws, which really those are like the foundation to talk about them. Just talk about your friend Anthony Comstock.
Oh man, I could talk about Anthony Comstock for days, but I won't. But yeah, I think what you were just saying about the legal text is at the heart of this play. And like, despite the fact that much of it is written to be very, very boring, as you were just saying, like the Tucson ordinance that you just had up is like pretty plain. No fire and brimstone. It just says merely that a person cannot appear in public wearing clothes of the opposite sex. But there is boring. Like it's not, it's not the fire and brimstone that I think, at least I can only speak for me, that I expected from such a law. But then, if you look closer at how this law was impacting people, there's so much violence in between the words of that law and how it was being applied. And if you look backward toward what masquerade laws were and how they were used to target gender nonconforming folks before 1883 when this ordinance was passed, and you look forward in time into the 19th century and 20th century to something like the Comstock Act, which here we are to Comstock, like that's another intensely boring bill. It was a bill prohibiting the distribution of certain materials related to abortion or contraception in the mail. Ugh, like
we're still dealing with like the ramifications of that today. And also, I mean, there's like the sidebar about that of this non-lawmaker writing a law, right, and getting it passed. So, well, the Comstock law tried to interrupt you, so I'm going to play it now. Just this little rehearsal clip. You'll see everyone in masks because it was July 2021. We were all vaccinated, getting tested on a weekly basis. And this activity was like, how can we make this boring text a little bit more lively? And, you know, we are a theater company that is driven by physical theater techniques. So it's like, how are we embodying this language?
That no obscene, lewd, or lascivious book, pamphlet, picture, paper, print, or other publication of an indecent character.
Beautiful. So, and then the other thing is, from the beginning, from like almost 3.5 years ago, we were obsessed with this idea of like, we've got to have like a musical number in here, and a kick line. So this was another rehearsal where we were exploring this intersection of our kick line, but also the policing of bodies, as you'll see in here. And then you'll hear Linnea and myself giggling in the background.
5, 6, 7, 8,
We didn't have any fun. We had no fun in this process whatsoever. It was really nice actually going down memory lane. But now comes the part where we are going to, now that we've invoked our wonderful actors and co-collaborators, we are going to be bringing them in. So get your questions ready for those of you who want to know more from the actor perspective or have more questions for Linnea. Pop them into the comments section. And yeah, for those of you who maybe are new to No Pants in Tucson, we have a little brief video to show you. Hello, we're here with 3/4 of the cast of No Pants in Tucson. Thank you so much for magically appearing. Let's go around and please introduce yourselves. We should have said in order. Can we go in alphabetical order?
My name is April J. Barber. Hi.
I'm like, is it last name or first name? Because April is first for both of those things.
Yay!
Okay, I'll go next.
Right, Mariah.
April. Okay, hi.
Oh,
I'm
I was
Mariah.
done. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, great. My pronouns are she, her. I'm one of the actors in the show.
I'm Marissa. My pronouns are she, her, and I am also one of the actors in the show.
Well, and thank you so much for being here. And we want to wish Kian Johnson, our fourth performer, a very happy birthday. And we're sorry that we did not get to embarrass you by singing live on StreamYard. But, you know, I think that I'm extra excited to have us all together again. I mean, aside from the fact that it's been like a month now since we did the show and we're sad and we miss each other. But also we really do in our company practice various forms of community dramaturgy. And I think that's something that makes our process unique. So we want to dive into that with some questions for the full team.
Mm-hmm.
Linnea, you want to get the first question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, lovely actors, we were wondering if you could speak a little bit about what it's like to create a character from the source material. So, from just speak. What is that process like? Being presented with source material and creating a character from there.
April,
And
you look like you were gonna go.
you each played several historical figures in the show, and of course, well, we want to share also that like Mariah and Marissa, you were part of the project from the very inception of it. Mariah, you and I brainstorming angrily, excitedly in 2018 on the heels of Brett Kavanaugh being nominated to the Supreme Court. And also, Marissa, you came in from the very initial workshops. And April, your perspective is a little bit different because you came in this past July where a lot had been explored, but we were really starting to get doing a much more deep dive and kind of knew exactly who we wanted to be exploring. So now that I bought you a little more time to think about an answer, go for it, jump in.
Thank you. So working from nonfiction was challenging, and that I didn't want, it was all the work had been done, so thank you, all the research had been done, so I was given a complete body, and forming the character, for me it was all there, it was all in the information that was provided. What was most important for me was to ensure that I didn't make a gimmick of it or a joke of it or a mockery of it, and so I wanted to honor it, and starting there in the characterization, I hope I was able to stick to the truth of it all. So yes, whereas I feel like in fiction, the truth can be what you make it, I think, but in this it was all there. Yes, I think.
I will say.
Yeah, I feel.
Oh.
Go.
Okay, I will say. For me, I think there are two sides of the spectrum. If I'm given a historical person who has a lot of there's a lot of foundation and research about this specific person makes my job as an actor 10 times more easier, or maybe not, to figure out what that person's views might have been at the time period, or how they're walking through life. I think when it becomes more challenging is when you have characters like Alice and Mary, who have that little blurb, and it's like, okay, what happens now? So I think for creating character, or I should say, honoring these historical people and like trying to bring them into my body from scratch is thinking about from I usually start with like physicality, and looking how they like what does their body look like how what is their presence, how is their presence alone shaping a room, what are the perspectives they might have when they're alone, and who are they in public, thinking about them like that, and sort of scaffolding different perspectives a character might have in a specific environment. And I think that's how you get at the core of who someone is in those private and public moments. So that's how I craft character.
I love that, Marissa. I definitely find that I often work from the outside in as well. And with this show, and one of the main characters I played in the show, Dr. Mary Walker, it was an interesting experience for me, because that character had been explored heavily by one of our other collaborators and devisers, Tess Rodriguez, who was with us for a majority of the developmental process. So I was sort of being handed off this character who had a lot of physicality already. So it was a really fun exploration for me to put on somebody else's, like 2 layers of somebody else's physicality. And start from there, start from those moves, and see what that actually made me feel, and then build from there. And I also think that character we had a lot more of her history than some of the other characters in the show. So in that sense, I felt like I could sort of put on her literal clothes, the movement, and then speak her actual words. And she sort of, this might sound a little cheesy, but she started to like grow within me. I feel like I kind of like let it happen rather than putting assumptions on top of it.
I'm so glad you shared, Mariah, just, speaking about how the evolution of a character, or even just a moment in the show, can happen within the ensemble, because there are certainly other examples of moments or physical language that someone who was in the creative process created, that then morphed into something else or got adopted by another character. And we had, now I'm forgetting the number of artists, but we had many artists working on this show from the earliest phases. And some of those people also created digital content. Even thinking about the song that you, Mariah, composed for Harry Allen back in April 2020, when we were just sort of playing with like, how could we tell a character's story using song? What would that mean? How can we stay true to their words? Like, what would that be musically? And then having that song be taken and made into something new by Kian, who then composed as a tune for another piece of text. And there's so many examples of ways in which somebody else's content that they generated then influenced the final product, and it may or may not have belonged to them from the beginning. Marissa, there's a question, and April, that both of you hopefully can speak to. The scene where the 2 of you are Alice and Mary. Those are the 2 historical figures that we started with. And the question from Rob from Amnesia Wars is, Can you speak about the process that led you to speak in future past tense, describing the arrest that was about to happen? That was such a good moment. How was that discovered? But anyone can answer this. Linnea, Mariah, memories from
I'm not
the
going to
rehearsal
answer
room.
it, but I just want to say to Rob, that is my favorite moment, or one of my favorite moments of the show too. That, like, are we in the past? Are we in the present? It always really affected me.
I think just one of the things that I remember from that developing that scene was thinking back to the Women in Pants book that is still behind Melissa on the shelf. This book is the Bible. It's the book of all of these pictures of women who would dress up in the like late 1800s, early 1900s in private to dress in pants and then take pictures of themselves. It was this thing that women would often do, like just to
these parlor photos.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sorry. And like just paging through it, it's so fascinating to see there these really intimate photos of these women who look very masculine and or like very playful. It's just this delightful kind of collage of all these women's lives, of all these historical figures' lives, and kind of through looking at that, I couldn't help but wondering, as the dramaturg, like who were these people? Like how, like for some of them, it certainly must have been, because of the humor behind it, just like a very fun, like kind of freedom, like within these little parlor shoots that they were doing. But for some of them, there is this more kind of serious, quieter joy behind their eyes, like in these photos, and which I couldn't help but connect to Mary and Alice, like at least in my dramaturgical mind, about like, could they have been taking photos? Like, could this have been like a grand adventure for them that extended out beyond this parlor room?
And also that we were really looking at this frozen moment in time of Mary and Alice being captured in a moment that hopefully potentially was very happy for them, very fulfilling, very exciting, even though something bad was going to happen. But they didn't know it when the photograph was taken. So that really was the kernel that's what the idea was, that we were playing with in exploring the future and past tense at the same time with that photograph. April?
Yep. So we didn't want to, I remember that. So in the devising process, we played with, we knew how the story ended. We had that clip, but we wanted to find out, what was happening before. What was the moment? Who were these people? These people aren't simply what the outcome that we know. So who are they in this process? And so in the devising process, we played with the moments before and the lives before, and why and how, and in those moments we found each other, and you didn't want to take that away from the process, and you didn't want it, you wanted it to be balanced. You didn't want the moments that we'd shared to be overshadowed by what happens, but you wanted them to be balanced out. It's all in its truth, if that makes sense. So it had to go together. I believe that's how it made the cut. Yes.
Yeah. I was going to say that this had come up as we were doing our research, that a lot of if we were able to find research or primary sources, secondary sources about Black women or non-binary folks that were masquerading in men's clothing, there there wasn't much, or it was that they were arrested, end of story, that is how we're going to define this person. So I saw that I as a performer, that could be taken as that is frustrating, yet at the same time I think there's a lot of responsibility to, like April was saying, to capture the joy that existed in these Black women's lives, that didn't make the newspaper, that didn't make what we're finding on JSTOR today, because that's what is actually making a person. We're not just here to define someone by a crime, quote unquote, that they committed, but that is what came up a lot, which is very frustrating, but something that we discuss, and like looking back at the different Black and brown folks that came up in our research.
So April, Mariah, and Marissa, we want to hear from you, like, what is it like as a performer and as a deviser to be working with a dramaturg in the rehearsal room? And I know this process, we mentioned that we had, the good fortune to have Lindy with us for the sort of middle section when we were all completely remote on Zoom, and then Linnea in person, which was just such a different vibe in and of itself, to actually have real-time tactile communication, right? But what is that like for you as devisers and performers? And you're not just stuck with me as the director.
Yeah. I think I just maybe had like an epiphany. Aside from like all the research, which we understand happens and we're so thankful for, and we love dramaturgs. Having a dramaturg in the room is sort of like having a lifeguard there for a performer that, I will speak for myself. I can push the limits as far as I can in that moment and know that somebody's there in the spirit of the show with me to be like, okay, that actually is not dramaturgically helpful or factual or whatever that may be. So it does sort of, there's even within that boundary, and I always talk about this, like boundaries set you free. So having that, like you can really just go for it, and knowing that Linnea was there, be like, okay, yes, or I don't know what you're doing. That's not helpful. Was just a wonderful way to make this show as big and bold and wonderful as it needed to be.
I love that. Dramaturgs as lifeguards, especially since in this process, we had very limited interaction with a live audience, where typically in our process, we do workshops and we share scenes and we have an audience in the room, even if it's just like a small audience of our friends. And you learn so much from, like, when do people gasp? When do they lean forward? When do they yawn? When are they looking at the ceiling? And we got none of those context clues, except when we did have Linnea in the room as this lifeguard. I love it. Can you add that to your resume / business card, please?
It's going on my website. Thank you, Mariah.
Lifeguard for actors.
It was my first time working with a dramaturg. I found it much like Mariah said, that she helped keep us grounded, I think, as actors, and in the devising process. And a lot of improvising, we can run away with our ideas. And it was nice to have someone who is smart, because we were wild and silly, and grounded, incredibly intelligent, to go, good try, but, and then correct us with what was wrong. But it was also, it was like having an encyclopedia, in the room. So, the only thing I can think of is when you're playing Scrabble and you need a dictionary to make sure if the word is actually a word. That was Linnea. And I thought, can we do that? Does that make sense? Is that right? And it was either yes or no, or yeah, that's good. And it was a great gauge to have, and an incredible resource. to stay on topic, to stay true to the material. And any questions, like anytime we had a question, it was like she had the answer, and if she didn't, she found it. So yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll say like very briefly that not only is having a dramaturg in the room awesome in terms of being like dramaturgically speaking, this is no. It's also very helpful to have a dramaturg to tell you what are the different potentials for the expansiveness that an improv session just was, especially with this wordy legalese that we're dealing with a lot of the research that we found. So it's not just you can't. This is not right. It's here are the options of what you just did, which is super helpful.
You're so right, Marissa. Linnea is rarely prescriptive, which is such a gift in terms of opening up those worlds of possibility. And certainly, I haven't calculated yet how many drafts of the script we had. There were a lot. And I spent many hours pouring through the script with Linnea, really trying to like figure out like what threads needed to be tugged on further to like connect those dots. And, you know, there definitely were some things that it took me a little longer to see what Linnea had pointed out. But eventually I got there. And
Melissa, I have this like, there's this moment where I was like, oh my gosh, like Linnea was so right. Like we left the right amount of breadcrumbs this time. Cause I feel like Linnea, that was your thing. Like we need some more breadcrumbs. Like we need to bring this audience along with us. And that's so challenging when you've been in a devising process for 2+ years to know like what the outside is seeing. So I remember having that moment of being like, oh my gosh, like I could see what you had meant when it finally happened.
Well, Linnea was certainly like all good dramaturgs, like an advocate for the audience. Absolutely.
Advocate for the audience, lifeguard for actors.
Right.
Wow, this is so sweet. This is like you all are so wonderful. This is like as a dramaturg, this is like my first like kind of major devising project as well. And I think it's just I think one thing that was so beautiful about this process in particular, I think, is that there is so many like perspectives, and there was no like sort of dominating like yes no stamp that was going on. And like I think that is just such a really amazing part, I think, of this play for me as a dramaturg, is that nobody was in this room to say like absolutely never do that again. Like, you know, or like there's no way we'll ever use that. Like there's always a kind of environment like of experimentation, of like using the information that we were generating and using in like a very playful and like joyful way, if that makes sense, which is like such a great dramaturgical gift, I think.
We definitely create with the mindset that everything is valuable, even if it's to point out to us what doesn't work, or which story we don't want to tell. So with that in mind, since we did generate a lot of content in this time, and we did have to let go of content, I would like to know, my closing question for all of you is, what was your favorite piece of source material that did not make it into the show?
Mine was the story of Murray Hall. Yes, that was beautiful and painful. The congressman who died of breast cancer. like that, it just blew my mind, the whole story, the funeral, the way that people spoke about him, and that he was trying to figure out what was wrong and if it could be fixed without receiving medical attention, and thereby being found out. Yeah, that was heartbreaking.
That was definitely a story that Linnea and I felt very sad about taking out of the final draft. There were two stories, historical figures that we took out of the final draft that felt like so challenging to say goodbye to, and yet we couldn't fit everyone in there, which was also really the impetus behind the digital series, so that we could tell more stories and not leave any of these voices out. So I do want to say that there is an opportunity that exists for us to still tell Murray Hall's story through No Pants Digital, and I really do want to make that happen this coming year. One of our goals. I missed the Stacey babies. We kind of saw them at the end. They were in a different iteration.
Yeah.
We had them, but there was a lot. Stacey, may she rest in peace.
Stassi.
Mariah's upset. She was like,
No, I
God!
knew why I was gonna grab her Stacey.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Marissa. You can talk with a straight face now.
And look at you dead in the eye with my babies.
I do love that.
The snatched waist trainers.
Oh, yeah.
Hate to see you go, but I understand why you needed to go.
That's a vicious Hallmark card. There was one improv. My original answer was Murray Hall, but for the sake of not repeating, there was one day of exploration where it was sort of a long improv where we were trying to, I wasn't doing it. I was sitting down, but our lovely actors were trying to recreate like an underground town hall where all the women of the town were trying to figure out how to get rid of the skirts or shorten them, but not really. My husband wouldn't like that, and like having to come back day after day to like negotiate that. I thought that was so funny. So funny. Next play.
Yeah, I feel like I put enough comments in your working drafts, Melissa, that I was able to like
Work through that.
salvage some of like the things I really needed. Number one being a baby falling out of a dress, which I got in the end.
Well done.
But yeah, I'm trying to think. Am I satisfied? I might be satisfied. I will say this is not source material. This is just Marissa improvisation. But the Descendants of Stacey was my all-time favorite composition. I don't know if that can be released publicly, but that was my favorite.
The secret files.
Yeah,
Yes, that be the secret files, the Stacey files, the Stacey files.
Well, I thank you all for joining us. I hope that piqued everyone's interest. Maybe we will be releasing more behind the scenes content in the future. But for now, I just want to say thank you so much for joining this conversation, and more importantly, for being the collaborators that you are. It was such a joy to build this show with all of you. Thank you. Now comes all the thank yous. Thank you to our audience for tuning in, and our amazing interpreters, Claire and Stephanie. And we are grateful for Inclusive Communication Services for providing ASL interpretation tonight. We also want to thank Michelle, our streaming technician, who has been backstage making it all look good. Thank you so much. And you have 2 days left to rent and watch No Pants in Tucson on demand. And if you already have, thank you so much. And to see what we're up to next, make sure you're on our email list and check out our website. Exactly. Thank you. Brilliantly done. All right, everyone. Thank you so much and have a good night.